Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? These days you can't go very far without hearing somebody talking about leveling up. And believe it or not, this video is going to be relevant to just about every single subject I talk about on this channel. So keep watching. So you look at YouTube, and YouTube is full of promises to help you level up your marketing, level up your guitar playing, level up your life. But that isn't really a new thing. There's no reason to believe that that terminology isn't borrowed from video games. And that terminology that the video games use, well, that's been borrowed for over 40 years from Dungeons and Dragons. Now, there's a problem I have with using the term leveling up in real life. I'm not a fan of that term when it's applied to real world growth because it really implies like a hierarchy. Like some people are better than other people or they're worth more than other people. And that kind of stratification is just not healthy. Like we deal with enough comparison and enough of that crap in class division in real life already. And there's phrases like, well, if you don't want to level up, that's fine. Stay miserable. They carry a lot of judgment. And you hear those on YouTube and other areas all the time. And, improvement really shouldn't be conflated with superiority. They're different things. The other thing is real skill growth, it's not linear. It doesn't occur in these level jumps. It starts out rough. Let's take, they're hanging behind me. So let's take bass guitar as an example. It starts out slow and it starts out rough. You learn how to hold the instrument, which can be uncomfortable. How do I drop my wrist? What do I do? How do I play? How do I hold down the strings? How do I coordinate my hands so that I can play the notes together? And then, we start to improve, like we learn scales, we learn modes, we learn some music theory, we maybe learn some blues patterns, some other common chord patterns. And we have this like rapid improvement. And all of a sudden, you go from just not even knowing how to hold the instrument and being completely inept to very rapidly, in most cases, learning an awful lot. And so you have that kind of skyrocketed growth. And then you hit a plateau. And then, you can stay on that plateau for a long time if you want to and make a lot of money, actually. But, you can continue with purposeful practice. And that brings about slow growth. And occasionally, there's a leap, an epiphany of sorts. You're like, aha, I didn't realize this. And I've had those throughout my career playing bass guitar. And then you make this rapid jump again, and then another plateau, and then another period of slow growth. So, any kind of skill improvement is slow, it's incremental, and it's very personal, and it's never really finished. And different people learn at different rates, or there's different things that they struggle with, and then have those aha moments. So you can't look at the growth of different people in any skill and expect it to be the same. Most of the money made in bass guitar, well, it's made in the fundamentals. It's not really made in all the flashy techniques. And somebody that can't play or can't play as well isn't, worth less than somebody who can. And, the leap from zero to kind of skilled, having some skill is a lot more dramatic than competent to expert. You're going from that person that just can't play the bass guitar at all, to continue to use that example, to being able to hold their own in a band. I joined a band pretty fast, but that's a huger leap. Or bigger leap. Huger, is that a word? There's a bigger leap from that and being able to play a bunch of different songs and a bunch of different styles to the true, virtuoso. So what about RPGs? Because let's talk about those for a little bit. In something like Dungeons and Dragons, the early versions of Dungeons and Dragons, characters tended to start off really competent, fitting their archetype right away. It wasn't a skills-based game, so there was a lot of skills they were assumed to have. My friend Jose was just talking to me about this the other day. And over time, and this was Jose's contention, especially after 3rd edition, and no, I don't want to start an edition war, a lot of abilities became locked behind levels that used to be available right away. And that kind of delayed gratification, it created this dissonance between the player expectation and what the actual character experience was. The characters no longer felt like the characters from Appendix N, the pulp fantasy heroes. I mean, heck, they never did at the low levels, but this made it even worse. And there was, of course, that, distance that was already created that you had to kind of, rise through a bunch of levels, at least 3 or 4, whatever it happened to be, before you really started to feel like those heroes. In a game that's really, really level heavy, where there's a huge amount of stratification, generally you don't feel heroic for a long, long time. And eventually, you've got this other problem that shows up. Characters feel superhuman. They go from being kind of like the average person to being a little competent to very rapidly become superhuman, less relatable, more like demigods. The verisimilitude is lost at that point, and they transcend the realm of believability. The suspension of disbelief is kind of shot, if I can talk. There's other systems that I've learned to like better. Where they front load the competence, as my friend Aloy is very fond of saying. You let the characters grow slowly and incrementally, but they've already kind of got these base skills at a level of competence already. And you avoid that kind of level creep where just like every session becomes this thing where it's like a video game where you're chasing the other levels. You're no longer paying attention to the imagined situation. You're chasing the next level. You're chasing the next big thing. But that level creep happens because then all the opposition has to increase in level as well. So the game always still feels the same, except you got bigger flashes and bigger guns and bigger fireballs and all that kind of stuff. But it's same old, same old. There's games like Lamentations of the Flame Princess, if you have to play a level-based game, or that really have avoided that level creep and front-loaded really, really well, especially after the VAM, Vaginas Are Magic rule set, which added a lot of extra things to the game where it front-loaded the characters, so you didn't wait. You feel like you were waiting for these abilities to show up, and then you just kind of raised in ability slowly and incrementally in the areas that were relevant to that particular character. So that was more satisfying to me. And skill-based systems, I've learned to like them a lot more. Where you start out, games like games powered by Ubiquity and what have you, where you start out being able to build a character that's already pretty, competent, and then they have this slow, incremental, and there's not this cartoonish growth that happens in a more level-based games. So focused on the games, if you will, they focus on what the character is rather than who they could become. So you're not always chasing that. I don't know if you can relate, but that I've learned to like that a lot more. And, so real life is about the slow mastery as well. It's like, with bass guitar, any craft, you improve gradually. You don't become a superhuman. There's this plateau you reach, and sometimes you break through. So role-playing games that emulate that, I really tend to like. And in real life, in role-playing games, in learning a skill, whatever it happens to be, just because somebody gets better than you doesn't make them more valuable as a human being. Everybody contributes. Everybody has worth. They're all, human beings, whether it's in real life, in a game, if whatever it happens to be, as a musician. I prefer that model in bands, in life, in role-playing games, where we all have worth, and we're not so concerned about leveling up and what level is this guy on, all that kind of stuff. We're not avatars like in video games. Real life is not about leveling up. It's about mastery, it's about depth, and it's about worth that doesn't depend on a number next to your name. Yes, I had to read notes because I had to write all this stuff down. And just let's stop pretending that growth has to come with some kind of chart or leaderboard or something like that. Who's on top and who's leveling up next, and that kind of stuff I don't like for a variety of reasons. You know what I mean? Tell me your thoughts on this. And if you're feeling stuck, go watch some of these videos, because you don't have to level up in life. I should be still pointing at them. Just figuring out what you want to get better at and what you've been letting slide. You know what I mean?